Hello and welcome to Module 2, How to Understand and Analyze Any Task 2 Question. So in this module, we're going to learn about the 5 different types of Task 2 question, and we're going to learn how to break down any question so that they are simple to answer and you'll give the examiner exactly what they want. So as I mentioned in the previous module, we're going to break things down so that they are as simple and easy to understand as possible. So let's recap what we did in the last module. In the last module, we found out what Task 2 is, an overview of Task 2, and we learned about the simple 5-step approach. So question analysis, planning, introduction, main body paragraphs, and conclusion. If you didn't look at module 1, please go back, don't cheat, and look at module 1. It's very important that you watch all of the modules. So the 5 different question types. Why do we need to know about the 5 different question types? Because it will affect our structure and it will affect how you answer the question. So the structure will be different for each of the 5 different question types. Your introduction will be different, your main body paragraphs will be different, and your conclusions will be slightly different for all of the different types of questions. So it's really, really important that you know the difference between the 5 different question types and you can quickly and easily identify them. So the 5 different question types are opinion, discussion, advantages and disadvantages, problems and solutions or causes and solution, and double question. So now let's look at each of them in more detail. So an opinion question. An opinion question will always start off with someone else's opinion, a statement that is one-sided. So like this one, every year several languages die out. Some people think that this is not important because life will be easier if there are fewer languages in the world. So it's a one-sided opinion about something, and they're asking you, do you agree with that statement or do you disagree with that statement? Do you not agree with that statement? Let's look at another opinion question. Being a celebrity, such as a famous film star or sports personality, brings more problems than benefits. So again, this is a one-sided opinion. This person who's making this statement thinks that there are more problems than there are benefits. And they don't ask you to agree or disagree. Instead, they ask you a direct question. Do you think that being a celebrity brings more problems? So this is exactly the same as do you agree or disagree. They've just phrased it slightly differently. However, 90% of opinion questions look like this. Do you agree or disagree? However, rarely they will ask you a direct question like this, but it's exactly the same as do you agree or disagree. Do you think that being a celebrity brings more problems is the same as saying do you agree or disagree. So let's look at discussion questions next. These are different. So in opinion questions, you had a one-sided statement. For discussion, you'll always be given both sides of the argument. So some people think that the teenage years are the happiest times of most people's lives. Others think that adult life brings more happiness in spite of greater responsibilities. So you're given 2 sides of the story here. With opinion, you are only given one side here, one side, but with discussion, you're given 2 sides. And it asks you to discuss both views and give your opinion. So let's look at a second discussion question. Some people say that the best way to increase public health is by increasing the number of sports facilities. Others, however, say that this would have little effect on public health and that other measures are required. So you can see again, they're showing both sides of an argument. They're showing one side and the opposite side. And again, they ask you to discuss both these views and give your own opinion. So you should see the difference between an opinion question and a discussion question. Opinion is one side, do you agree or disagree? Discussion is 2 sides and you need to discuss both of them. So advantages and disadvantages. Some experts believe that it is better for children to begin a foreign language at primary school rather than secondary school. So it is just a general statement, and they say, do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages? So you'll always be given just one statement and then asked an advantages and disadvantages question. Let's look at a second example. In some countries, young people are encouraged to work or travel for a year between finishing high school and starting university studies. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages for young people who decide to do this. So again, you'll be given one statement and then you have to discuss the advantages and disadvantages. So the difference between a discussion essay is where you just discuss both views. For an advantages and disadvantages question, they are slightly different because it's specifically about the advantages and disadvantages of one thing. They're not asking you to discuss both sides really. They're asking you to give advantages and disadvantages on one topic or one view. So it's slightly different from the discussion essay. But for advantages and disadvantages, you'll always be able to spot them because it will have advantages and disadvantages in the question. They might say something like benefits or drawbacks, so synonyms of advantages and disadvantages, and you should answer them in the same way. So let's move on to our fourth type of question: problems and solutions, or causes and solutions. The reason why I've included both problems and causes is because you have to answer these in different ways. But we're going to do a whole module, a whole video on these questions, so don't worry about the distinction just yet. So you'll always be given a general statement. In some countries, the average weight of people is increasing and their levels of health and fitness are decreasing. What do you think are the causes of these problems, and what measures can be taken to solve them? So this is a causes and solutions essay. They want you to state the cause and they want you to state a solution. So there'll always be a general statement at the beginning and either problems or causes and solutions. So let's look at a problems and solutions one. Global warming is one of the biggest threats humans face in the 21st century, and sea levels are continuing to rise at alarming rates. What problems are associated with this, and what are some possible solutions? So this is a problems and solutions essay. You'll always have the words problems or causes and solutions. They make it very, very clear, so it's easy to spot them. Let's move on to a double question, sometimes called a two-part question. So today more people are traveling than ever before. Why is this the case? One question. What are the benefits of traveling for the traveler? Second question. So you'll always be given a general statement at the start about the topic, and then you'll be given two separate questions. So these questions are not really linked together. So got another one. Increasing the price of petrol is the best way to solve growing traffic and pollution problems. To what extent do you agree or disagree? And what other measures do you think might be effective? So if you just answered this question in an agree or disagree way and you didn't talk about the other measures, you would have failed the question. You probably would get band 5 for task response. So it's two separate questions that you need to deal with. So why is all this important? Why do you need to know the difference between them? If we don't know what the question asks us to do, then it's very difficult to get a high mark. Let's look at an example here. So again, looking at this example, if we just talked about other measures, or if we just talked about agree or disagree, then you can't get above a 5. This is one of the first questions that I give to students when normally in the first class of a writing class, I give them this question, and 90% of students will not talk about other measures. So unless you're aware of this, and unless you're thinking about it and breaking it down, you'll probably get a band 5 for task response. Even if you wrote an amazing essay about to what extent do you agree or disagree, but you didn't mention other measures, or you just mention other measures in one sentence, it doesn't matter how good your essay is, you will only get a band 5 for task response. So it's essential that you know the difference. So as I said before, it will affect our structure. It will affect also the language that we use. So there is very specific language, for example, about talking about problems and solutions, or causes and solutions. So in the subsequent lessons, in the lessons that will follow, for example, the whole lesson on problems and solutions, we will talk about the specific grammar structures that you can use to talk about problems and solutions, or the grammar structures that you use to give your opinion, or grammar structures that you use to discuss both views. These are very important. So the language will change with each different question type. Also, confidence. If you know all about each question, you will be more confident when you go in. You won't panic, you won't get stressed, because you'll be familiar with each question type, and you'll know exactly which structure to use, what language to use, and the result will be a better essay and a higher score. And lastly, planning. You will be able to quickly plan out your answer if you are aware of the structure for that answer. So it's linked in with the structure. You'll be able to plan much more effectively by planning for each different type of question. So let's move on now to the first thing you should be doing is question analysis. When analyzing a question, we have to think about 3 things. So analyzing is breaking it down into just 3 parts, and those 3 parts are the topic, the keywords, and the instruction words. So it's very, very important that you know the difference between the topic, keywords, and the instruction words. So let's look at some examples so we can look at them in more detail. Some experts believe that it is better for children to begin a foreign language at primary school rather than secondary school. So the topic of this essay is foreign languages, but these keywords are better, children, primary school, and secondary school. And the instruction words are, do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages? Let's look at another question. Every year several languages die out. Some people think that this is not important because life will be easier if there are fewer languages in the world. So the general topic is languages, but the keywords are die out, not important, easier, and fewer. And the instruction words are, do you agree or disagree? Why is this important? If you write about the general topic, you've not answered the question. So let's look at the 2 examples again. If you just wrote about foreign languages, everything you know about foreign languages, you haven't answered the specific question. For the second question, if you write everything you know about languages, you haven't answered the specific question. This is one of the most common mistakes for IELTS students in task 2. They write about the topic, not answer the question. If you can't tell the difference between the topic and the keywords, you can't answer the question. And if we do not think about the instructions, we won't answer the question correctly. Question analysis should be the very first thing you do. You should look at the question and you should think, what is the topic, what are the keywords, and what are the instruction words? It will save you time and focus your mind on answering the question. So we're going to have laser focus on how to answer the question. You should spend the first 2 minutes simply thinking about the question. So the first 2 minutes should be question analysis, thinking about the topic, thinking about the keywords, and thinking about the instruction words. So let's go back and check our questions again. Okay. So, in this question, some experts believe that it is better for children to begin foreign language at primary school rather than secondary school. So we need to answer this question about children, and we need to answer this question about primary school children rather than secondary school children. If we don't do that, we haven't answered the question. And we also have to think about advantages and disadvantages. So we have to use all of these things. We don't just talk about learning a foreign language. What are the advantages of learning a foreign language versus the disadvantages of learning a foreign language? We have to do it within the context of children in primary school learning it earlier than children in secondary school. What are the specific advantages for primary school children to learn it, and what are the disadvantages for primary school children to learn languages? So there should be three things that we should think about there. One, the topic is foreign languages, so we don't just write everything we know there. Two, we have to answer the question about primary school children learning foreign languages rather than secondary school children. And we have to answer the advantages of primary school children and the disadvantages of primary school children learning foreign languages. So this means that we answer the question correctly. If we don't do that, we get a band 5 for task response. Let's look at this question. So we've identified that the general topic is languages. So we don't just start talking about everything we know about learning languages or everything we know about language in general. We have to look at the specific topic. So the keywords are language is dying out. This means the language is not being used anymore. So some people think that it is not important because life will be easier if there are fewer languages. So we have to think about, do we agree that these languages are not important and that it is easier if there are fewer languages? Or should we disagree and say, no, it is important and life will not be easier with fewer languages? So that means that we have specifically answered the question. Okay, so let's recap what we learned in this module. In this module, we looked at the 5 different question types, which are opinion, discussion, advantages and disadvantages, problems and solutions, and the double question. And we learned how to break any question down into 3 parts and why this is important. Okay, so don't worry if you didn't understand everything just quite yet. We'll be looking at question analysis again and again and again in all of the rest of the modules. So don't worry if you didn't understand everything. So in the next module, we're going to learn how to think like an examiner, and we're going to look at the 4 different marking criteria and how we can get bands 7 to 9 for each of them. This is an extremely important module because knowing how to think like an examiner allows you to give the examiner exactly what they want, and that leads to very high scores. So that's the end of this module. I hope you find it useful, and I look forward to seeing you again in module 3. Thank you very much. Goodbye.